Transient children are children who move from one school to another, and usually they will have been to more than 3 schools. Some children have been to over 20 schools by the time they reach year 8. There is a very small percentage of transient children who families go from well-paid jobs and they're on promotion, they're planned and they fit nicely into a school year. And the Armed Forces children are some of those children. But the vast majority of children in New Zealand and probably around the world who move frequently move because things aren't going so well for their families. They can't afford the rent, they can't pay their bills, and the family has to seek cheaper accommodation, very often doubling up with another family.
So how did you carry out your research? Because in the end the kids aren't at the school.
I looked at year 8 children, so I looked in both studies at 2,500 year 8 students' progress and attendance cards. And on that card were all the schools the children had been to, the dates that they had left one school and entered the next. And that often gave sometimes a week or 2, but sometimes months elapsing between going from one school to another. So the first study I did asked the principal and boards of trustees and what they thought about children who were coming into their school who had attended many schools. The second study I did was to go back to the same schools and look at the same schools, but again that time I didn't ask the adults, I asked the children, and I got a most wonderful range of very interesting observations from the children. We're doing hundreds of questionnaires and then doing focus groups and having conversations with the children. It was very heart-rending really to hear the children talk about their experiences, and their observations were very mature.
What about the effect on the children themselves? How do they feel?
Well, often they come in feeling a bit disorientated and also sad that they have left their friends behind. They feel they have no one to talk to, that very special friend. And it's not just the children who are transient whose learning and friendships are affected, it's also the children who are stable in those schools, settled families in areas of high levels of transience. They have their learning interrupted in the same way really, because they lose their friends because they leave, and the teacher is having to develop new routines, do extra assessment and develop the program yet again for those children.
It's almost like a chain. It's the kids don't go to school, the school's affected, the kids then get into trouble, that affects the economy leads to poverty, the poverty leads to kids not being able to school. It's like a cycle.
It is a cycle, and the other thing is, for the longer it goes on, the more it becomes part of our society, because this is the way their parents had to manage, and then their parents maybe haven't developed a sense of belonging to a community, and this is a very strong thing. People are far more likely to do social and kind acts when they feel they belong and they're known. Well, children and their parents don't feel they're belonging and known if they move from place to place frequently.
So I guess the bottom line is what's actually needed.
In New Zealand we have a very high rate. In Great Britain, at the time I did my first study, Her Majesty's Chief Inspector, that's the senior inspector in the country, said that transience was probably the most great educational difficulty that was had at the time. And what they considered high was 30%. In New Zealand at the same time, what we considered high was 70 to 100% in a school. So our level is very much higher, and there are lots of practical ways of reducing transience. The very first one is that parents have sufficient money to be able to afford affordable housing. So something like the market rents that were put into place when the last National Government was in power was of serious detriment, and the minute that those rates of rent came down, families were able to stay in one area and sustain maybe all of their child's schooling. The other thing is incomes are low relative to the cost of housing, whether it be bought or rental, and Surprisingly, some people think that if you live in a poor area, your rent is then going to be affordable, but unfortunately it's not. And that's why the children in poorer areas move very frequently. And Child Poverty Action, I've got some of their information here, which is carefully researched, shows that a very large percentage of New Zealand children live in poverty, and they're suggesting a third, which is quite mind-boggling.
What are the dangers if we don't do anything?
The dangers are huge. The dangers are immediately sad children. And sad children, one, don't learn easily, and also will be disruptive to all the children because they're feeling sad. We will have considerably less well-educated adults, and so it will affect our economy because these are all children with ability. Every one of them can contribute both economically and socially in the future. And I believe a way of significantly reducing the number of people in prison is by addressing the need of child transients. And this would be positive because we don't have the grief and the damage that's been done either to the children in their young age or to society at large.
Well, Anna, thank you very much indeed.